Hello and welcome to UnHerd. I'm Florence Reed. Since 2016, euthanasia has been legal in Canada, and next year the right to request assisted suicide is due to be extended to mental health as well as physical health conditions. In June 2019, 61-year-old Gary Nichols was taken to hospital in Chilliwack, Canada. Within a month, he had requested euthanasia and died by lethal injection. His brother Gary Nichols is here to tell us about it. Gary, it's good to meet you.
Yeah, hi there, Flo. I'm glad you're telling Alan's story. It needs to be told just to make people aware of some of the problems really with medical assisted dying. There's a lot of cases maybe where it's a good thing, there's no need to watch somebody suffer, but if it's going to be loosely and sloppily applied, it's a terrible position for a family to be in.
And this was the position that you found yourself in with your wife Trish and your other brother Wayne as well. Could you just tell me a little bit about the situation before Alan was hospitalised? What was his life like before that time?
It was a challenging life. When he was a young boy at 12 and 13, he was diagnosed with a brain tumor, a benign tumor. So the surgeons proceeded with surgery to remove the tumor. Unfortunately, it grew back, so they went in and surgically removed a deeper cut of the tumor, which unfortunately had to remove part of his brain, which affected mostly his right side. So his right side was quite physically, not at first impaired, as well as his hearing. As his life went on, he actually lived a fairly normal life. I think he had mental challenges on the way as his hearing started to diminish, and he noticed his right side. I mean, there's a lot of things he couldn't do now, like play hockey or maybe run, but he could walk and function quite normal.
It was perhaps complicated, but it was still a life worth living. You wouldn't say that this was someone who was completely incapacitated or at the end of their life in the way that you might think of a euthanasia patient being.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, when you think that his surgeries were when he was 12 and 13, he managed to complete school, high school, and had a working career.
Forgive me for asking this, but in the years prior to his hospitalisation, had there been a decline in his health, or was that more complicated?
I would say there was a slow diminish that kind of went, up and down. There were times where he probably didn't want to live, like just because he would like to be normal again, like how he was before the surgeries. And so he would go through stages where life was good, and then he'd hit a stage like maybe for a while, for a month or two, where he didn't feel like living.
It would be fair to say that this came in ebbs and flows. It wasn't simply a downhill trajectory at the time when he was hospitalised.
Most definitely. As a matter of fact, from 2017 to 2019, up to the time where he was actually taken to the hospital, unwillingly, by the way, it wasn't something that he drove himself or got transported to the hospital. He was actually apprehended by the police and physically put into the ambulance to the hospital. He was actually doing really well. He had a really good stretch there for 2 years. Like, he was doing really good. He was being treated for absolutely nothing, no illness.
So let's go to that day then in 2019. What actually happened? Were you in contact with him when he was hospitalised, or how did you find out?
I got phoned by my brother, but I actually headed from Edmonton to the Chilliwack Hospital that same day. And I'll just give you a little bit of introduction what was going up to them, because as somebody with, let's say, psychiatric issues, which is easy to understand after you've had brain surgery, there's brain trauma, or he did have the odd a couple seizures and things like that. So he did have, complications mentally from all of his history of medical conditions. Um, and things would really bother him, like changes. So leading up to um, June 16th, the day he was taken to the hospital, he was aware that my brother, who was the main contact because he was in the area, he would go to Alan's place once a week, take him out shopping, take him to do his banking. Well, my brother had informed him over the last year leading up to this that he would be going away. He wanted to go across Canada. So that kind of angered him a little bit because he liked the routine, right? Well, he wouldn't accept friends coming to transport him to do his running around. He wouldn't take or not an ambulance, taxi or any other assistance. So I was going to have to fly out from Edmonton to Chilliwack, take him out, do his shopping, do his banking, etc., and then come back home. So that angered him a bit just because there was a change. He had a problem with the bank. He went to pay his property taxes. They said, Alan, you're a BC resident. You can't apply for the homeowner's grant here. You have to go to the Chilliwack Municipal Hall. He says, well, I've always been coming here to the bank. Well, we're not allowed to do it anymore. And he got really upset and he had to be escorted out of the bank just because that was another change. Safeway, where he liked to do his shopping, was closing down to do renovations to turn it into an alternative Safeway store. And his neighbor, Sharon, who was kind of she assisted us quite a bit because she was his neighbor. She would let us know if there's anything that looked unusual over at Alan's place. Well, she was moving from Chilliwack to Cranbrook. And that was one of the neighbors, or at least acquaintance, or that Alan actually liked.
So he'd lost a lot of this local network. It seems almost like the perfect storm for a mental health crisis if you're already vulnerable.
Very, very much so. I mean, this is somebody who, when you go inside your door, locks the door. All his furniture, a lot of it has been removed because he didn't want people coming over. Yeah, so you're exactly right. And then he gets that train of thought, and he's upset with everybody now. So I was coming out there that day. He was transported to the hospital. So I went to see him in the emergency room, and right away he looked at me. He looked like surprised. Oh, like, what are you doing here? Kind of thing. And he says to me, if you're not here to bust me out, you might as well leave.
What do you think he meant by that? He didn't want to be there?
He didn't want to be there, most definitely. He liked to do things his own way. He didn't want to come there.
And you said he'd been taken against his will. What does that actually mean in terms of, was he picked up by a mental health specialist? Was it an ambulance? What had actually happened?
The neighbor, like I said, her name was Sharon, called my brother and says, I haven't seen Alan for the last couple of days. I'm a little bit concerned. And of course, my brother was aware of the couple of weeks leading up to this date of the problems with Alan, with the changes, right, that I just mentioned. And she says, well, should I call the police just to have a check on him? And my brother said, sure. So the police went over to check on him. Of course, he wouldn't open the door. So they called the locksmith. Or no, actually, Sharon had a key. I'm sorry. So Sharon opened the door and let the police in. Well, they didn't like what they seen. They said you could see that maybe he was abusing himself by not drinking enough fluids, not eating properly. They just thought he had suicide thoughts.
But this wasn't a health scare in the sense that it was not a flare-up of his other health conditions. This was a case of mental health.
Exactly. And so they called the ambulance, and the police, according to Sharon, Alan was fighting not to go into the ambulance. They were basically pinning his arms and legs to force him in there. So from that point, they transferred him to the Chilliwack General Hospital. They admitted him under the Mental Health Act. So they're quite aware there's some mental issues here. And there he is. He's admitted to the hospital. And then that's the day I go to see him in the emergency. And I said, Al, I can't bust you out of here. I think you're in the right place. They need to look at you. They need to get you back on track.
So at that point, you had trust for these doctors and nurses who were taking care of him to get him back on his feet and then get him back home, I assume.
Yeah, that's what the hospital's supposed to be for. You don't. I'm going to be telling the truth of the matter. Wasn't even aware of MAID at that time, medical assisted dying. I didn't even know it existed in Canada. And then even my ignorance, I wasn't even too sure when they legalized even suicide or anything like that.
So you'd never known anyone who had taken their own life through this process?
No.
And they didn't notify you of that possibility when you went to visit him in the hospital?
Nothing like that at all. And unfortunately, at that time now, because I left and came back the next day with my brother, Alan was mad at me now for not taking him out of the hospital. So he didn't want to see anybody. So
it doesn't sound like he was in his right state of mind.
He wasn't in his right state, no. And when he got upset or angered, he took it out on of course, the people that support him and love him really, they transferred him from the emergency ward that night to the psychiatric ward, right? So we went to see him, but he didn't want to see anybody now. He's mad at everybody. And so, but my brother, of course, he was leaving in a couple days to go across Canada. So I stuck around for a couple more days, and I went to see the coordinator of the psychiatric ward, and I went to see the administration of the hospital. I said, I have to go back to Edmonton in a couple days, but please keep me up to date. Well, we don't find out all the information, like even how Ellen put up a fight to go in the hospital like that. I wasn't even aware of that the night that I went to see him. And if I would have known that, I probably would have taken him out of the hospital. But I didn't find that out from Sharon till much time later.
What it sounds like to me at this point is you've got someone incredibly vulnerable in the most obvious sense in hospital, and then yourself and your brother who have acted even informally as kind of custodians of this person in many ways, looking after him, taking him to do his banking and his shopping and things that he might have found kind of overwhelming in everyday life. And you are not being consulted now on his hospitalisation and eventually the decision that he was going to make, or even the potential of it happening. I mean, what were you thinking at that point? Did you want more involvement in his care?
Well, most definitely we want to be informed what's going on. And every time I would call the hospital, say, oh, he's doing fine, he's okay, yeah, he's eating, all sorts of things. You think wonderful things. Okay, good, he's getting back on track.
So they were updating you, but they were updating you, telling you that he's doing well and on the road to recovery.
Yeah, they were using patient confidentiality, which in suicide, I'm sorry, you should not be, you don't have to acknowledge patient confidentiality when it comes to suicide. You're a physician or any medical team's allowed to say, sorry, we think you're vulnerable, like you say. We have to consult your family and get them involved. They used it. Like the Chilliwack General Hospital did more to assist them with this medical assisted dying than to keep them alive. And the reason I say that, after 2 days after giving the antidepressants, a day or two later, they transferred him from the psychiatric unit to the PATH unit. And I don't have any proof, but I'm going to say that I want medical assisted dying because he was mad at everybody. And so they transferred him, and don't tell my parents, don't tell my brothers or anything because they'll just try to convince me otherwise. Well, you think the hospital would want to tell us because we're the ones that may be going to be able to talk him out of it.
You think he might have said it in a kind of fit of rage, in a moment of madness, effectively, and then it's been moved upon by the hospital itself without proper consideration of how you could step in at that point.
Exactly. We were his support. We're the ones that loved him. We were the ones that had the history of his health, his well-being and everything like that. We're the ones that knew everything. My parents did a wonderful job up to the time that they passed. And we stepped in there, and like you were saying earlier, my brother would come down once a week, take him shopping, do all his banking needs. I always went out there a couple of times a year to visit him and make sure everything was intact. The family provided him with lots of funding. I mean, when he passed away, he had $250,000 still in the bank. Like he wasn't relying on the system at all. He was collecting CPP disability, but he wouldn't even collect his union pension and things like that. So he was not a burden on the government for financial needs or anything. And why I'm really disappointed and mad, and I've lost all respect for any of this, is the last couple of weeks he's in the hospital. He was only there for a month, by the way, since he was admitted and given MAID. The last 2 weeks, they were treating him for nothing. They were giving him room and board. And I said, why did you keep him there? Well, Ellen didn't think he should go home because you guys would try to convince him otherwise too. Well, if that's what we would do, that'd be fine. I mean, you've already approved him for medical assisted dying. Release him.
So he'd been approved for the assisted dying, and then their suggestion was that he should stay in this kind of almost safe house to avoid him being convinced otherwise by his family. Yeah.
And just because he says, well, I don't want them to know. We didn't find out to almost the very end.
How can this patient confidentiality actually work when you've got a patient who is in such mental distress that they are considering suicide? That surely would be the grounds under which to say that that person is perhaps not competent to be making those decisions if they are under such mental duress that they're considering taking their own life without a terminal illness or some other factor at play. I mean, for you, this must have been utterly baffling when you heard that he was making improvements and then suddenly you find out that he's gone. How did that actually take me to that actual time? You'd heard that he was doing well. How did you actually find out that he'd been accepted to take on the euthanasia?
On a Monday, I got a call from who's the family doctor looking after him there. He didn't really have a prescribed doctor because he didn't trust doctors at all. But of course, the hospital assigns a doctor. This doctor calls me and says, first thing they ask, do you have a power of attorney over your brother? That's what they asked me. That's what the doctor asked me. I said, oh, no, I don't. I mean, it's something we always encourage Alan to live a free will life. And then the doctor informed me, well, Alan's been approved for medical assisted dying. And of course, I just break down. I'm at work. And I break down and, want to see him. Want to see him right away. Well, we'll have to talk to him, see if he'll see anybody, because right now he has restricted any visitors. Well, the doctor comes back and says, yeah, Alan said he's willing to see you. So we drove out. We drove out from Edmonton to Chilliwack, went to see him. It was later in the day. The nurse says, well, Alan doesn't want to visit today. He says, come back tomorrow morning. So we come back, and this is the eve now, the day that he's to receive MAID. And we find out there's nothing that we can do. That's what the doctor says. It's Alan's choice. You cannot do anything. So we're in a dilemma now. We don't know. Should we go see a lawyer and get a judge to stop this for a while, to have it privately investigated and make sure that this is all good? Because we were totally ignorant to the whole MAID process.
But you've only got a matter of hours here. I assume it's really coming down close to the wire, and also I suppose the other thing is that if you're being told that he's got this terminal situation, there is not, you must feel helpless.
Yeah, felt really helpless, and so we come back the next morning to see him, and I'm even looking at his medical chart, and there's nothing like all his vitals look really good. So I mean, it doesn't look like there's any heart problems, anything like that. So we spent the whole day with him, and we had a really good visit. And he was, of course, doing everything himself. We walked around the corridor there a few times, and I thought we convince him otherwise. And I think we came really, really close to convince him not to do this. And there's a few things, like I said to him, like I said, Alan, if Dad was alive today, you wouldn't be doing this. And he looked at me and couldn't even talk because he knows that's the truth. Another thing I said to him, Alan, I'm contemplating retiring this year. And I says, possibly can move back to Chilliwack, give you a little more support and a little more family close by. And he just looks at me and says, geez, I wish I would have known that. And of course we say, you know that now, but with his mental instability, he can't make a decision that fast, right? It takes some time to process the information. He doesn't process fast.
So do you think if you'd had that same conversation a week earlier, before he was pushed to make a decision about the assisted dying, that he might have made a different one?
Most definitely. I mean, over his life, he did have, I don't want to live. He probably had suicide thoughts and things like that. I mean, I would take him for a drive and then come back, and he says, well, I thought you were going to maybe kill me and leave me out there, or are you going to leave me home with all these knives and stuff like that? He would say stuff like that. I said, Alan, I trust you. I said, if that's what you want to do, I says, I can't guard you 24/7. I says, so these are your choices, not, so.
Horrible irony of this is if he was quite a paranoid person and didn't trust people in positions of power, then what can this tell us about that situation? It makes you feel paranoid just to think of a group of people advising you on your right to take your own life and then dissuading you from speaking to your own family about it. That feels like you're stuck in a kind of nightmare.
Yeah, most definitely. It's like like who's running the show here? Like, especially you're coming in, you're leading up to actually the pandemic, right? 2019. And look, we found out how important family is. And here's the medical system and the government saying, well, even the MAID bills that the federal government passing, and we're talking assisted suicide. That's what it is. You're making it easier for suicide people to have suicide. That's all you're doing. There's a lot of people that think suicide, but they won't do it. But you're making it easy for them, and you're going to use patient. You're not putting anything in there to restrict patient confidentiality. Yet you want to pass MAID now for children under 18. You want to pass it for individuals with physical and mental disabilities, and you're not going to put something like that in there. And there's not even a criteria to say who's of a sound mind to apply for MAID. So why even writing bills? Why are you wasting taxpayers' money doing it? Why don't you just set up a walk-in clinic for it then? Because that's what's going to happen. Because once the government opens the door, these physicians and medical teams are just going to open it wider. So it shows it in my brother's case. None of that. He was vulnerable with psychiatric issues, and his natural foreseeable death wasn't there. So those are two of the main criteria for MAID. So if you're going to abuse it then, what do you think is going to happen down the road and you widen it so much more?
So forgive me for this, it's a horrible question to have to ask, but could you just talk me through what the actual process of getting the MAID, the medically assisted dying, was in Alan's case? How did that actually happen?
Well, he filled out his form to request medical assisted dying. On his form, he put hearing loss. So hearing loss, and you're supposed to have a natural foreseeable death under Bill C-14, which was the first MAID bill written in 2019, which he was to meet MAID requirements at that time. That's what he had on his MAID.
So I've got his MAID form here, and I can see, yes, what you're talking about, that he's got under medical diagnosis relevant to request for medical assistance in dying. He's put hearing loss there as the reason. My understanding of the law in Canada was that it had to be a life-ending illness of some sort, terminal or severe enough to cause serious chance of death, for that to even be considered. How did this happen?
Well, this is the whole problem. And every body that we go to request an investigation, they come back. Even the Fraser Valley Patient Quality Review Board, they came back and said, Alan didn't have to be dying. Yeah, he didn't have to be dying at that time, but it had to be foreseeable. They didn't give any diagnosis that he was diagnosed with eventually heart failure or something was his kidneys were going to be shut down in a year or two. They gave you nothing. And then also, they mentioned we didn't consider his history of mental health. Well, psychiatric MAID hasn't been approved, so how, you're just making up your own MAID requirements as you go. And also, patient confidentiality is why you guys were told what you were, and that was a request by Alan. My brother and I have talked about this. We know if he was sent home within a month or two, he'd be right back on track. Just by us visiting him, taking him out to do something, he would have changed his thought.
On his MAID application here, I don't want to give away any of his personal details, but I can see where his patient signature for his request is required. There is an X next to his name, which is often used for somebody, a doctor or a nurse or an administrator, to show someone who is perhaps unable to work out how a form works, where they're supposed to sign. It struck me as a worrying detail. If he's allowed to consent to his own death, if he needs to be shown where on the form to sign. Do you think he was able to consent?
Not at that time, just because him applying for MAID, I would say, was more out of anger and just like a moment in his life where he wasn't thinking clearly, just because of all the negativity that had happened around him leading up to that point, and also being transferred to the hospital unwillingly. So it's more of a rebellion than anything. He's just saying, I'm taking charge of my own life. I want MAID, right? Nobody can tell me he wanted to be in charge.
So Alan is assisted in dying by the hospital in Chilliwack. And what is on his death certificate? What does it say that he died of?
Oh, gee. Well, I think it was in euthanization, right?
And so that's now a cause of death in Canada, that there will be more and more people every year as this law becomes more liberalised who have this down on their death certificate.
They're going to say, oh, suicide is way down, you know, like, but it's just because they're all under MAID. Yeah. I mean, yeah,
So did you support MAID before this? So you said a bit before that you didn't have much awareness of it being legalised in Canada, but more generally in places like Belgium or the Netherlands, had you thought about assisted dying as an issue, a kind of moral issue, and what did you think about it before your experience with Alan?
I'm going to say I had none because I was not aware of it at all. And I was not even aware of other countries like Netherlands and things like that with it in Belgium. And it wasn't until after Alan received MAID that you start obtaining the learning process of it all. And even at this point, I'm probably okay with it. If somebody's got terminal ill cancer, I've seen patients with cancer and how they deteriorate and diminish, and their quality of life, it becomes next to nothing. I can understand in euthanization to end your life maybe just before the very end, like within a 6-month period or whatever of that suffering. But for anything else, I have a hard time because even with people with disabilities, right away I think of the the Disability Olympics, right? That what if those individuals were offered MAID at an earlier time in their life? They wouldn't achieve where they are there. And you can see the expressions on those athletes when they're in those events. Like, I mean, they're living. They really are living. And if you don't give that opportunity, then how will they ever know? So if you're going to take their life away before they even have that opportunity, before they actually, they have the knowledge and the information to carry on, or the strength, or whatever it might be, but you got to give them that opportunity. And it's a proven fact that even people that attempt suicide and fail, they regret it. I mean, there's a lot of facts on that. I mean, of course, we can't obtain too much facts on the people that are successful, but the people that don't, not many of them say that they would ever attempt it again.
And it's not just a case of disability as well, is it? It's also about poverty. If you are someone who doesn't have the means, as Alan did, to get out of hospital and get into a safe and secure home with support from friends and family, you might feel that you are a burden on those around you. If your healthcare is costing hundreds, thousands of dollars a day, you might feel that it's better for everyone. It's often the phrase used, if you just go. And I guess that's a major ethical question here, is how do we deal with that guilt that people feel who don't have those resources and might be causing a burden on their families and friends? How do we deal with that when it comes to things like assisted dying?
Yeah, I mean, as a taxpayer, to me, it's appalling that our government can say, okay, we want to put all these more dollars into disability and mental health, and at the same time expanding MAID. To me, that's you can't please everybody. Never are going to. So to me, you should make up your mind. Put your money into, like you say, providing better living standards for some of the people, or providing the medical needs for individuals. But then don't spend millions and $1,000s on this and then say, oh, here's MAID because it's an easier way out. We don't have to provide any more future funding for you or anything here.
Were you able to be with Alan when he passed away? Were you there at the time, or were you not allowed?
No, we stayed there right to the very end, and it was appalling. It was, the nurse that approved his MAID was also the nurse that gave him euthanization. Didn't realize that because we didn't have all the information. have just learned that in over the last year. And to me, that should be restricted right there. I mean, if you prove the person's maid and now you're going to be the one that gives them the maid, I mean, because they get paid for doing that. You know, so I mean, really, you're writing your own paycheck. It's a tight group. Like nobody really wants to do an investigation on this case, and I'm pretty assured just because it's quite apparent that he didn't meet all the maid requirements at that time. Now, maybe going forward, like next year or even now, maybe he would have met the requirements, but he didn't meet them back in 2019.
But even if he did, if we were in 2023, if we travelled in time and this had happened then, when MAID is due to be extended to those with mental health issues as their primary reason for ending their life, would it make it any better? Is it ethically sound to be euthanizing people for their mental health struggles? I mean, it seems absolutely obvious that if you are in a dire mental state, then being offered the opportunity to end your life for that reason and that reason alone might be a very short-term fix and cause a lot of trouble down the line.
Yeah, I mean, the medical system gave us no support for being the survivors of this. They give you nothing.
You weren't offered counselling or mental health support?
No, absolutely nothing. And
well, maybe they thought they'd have a few more customers. I mean, maybe that's just me being cynical, but there's something about that really frightens me.
Yeah, and it is scary. And the one thing going forward, though, with Alan, they wouldn't need to bring in a specialist. So you can't just approve somebody, and I think there's a longer time limit as well. And hopefully they do due diligence and professional duties by consulting with everybody around them. Right now, they just took everything that Alan said as being truthful, rather than talking to his neighbor who knew him or talking to us, getting the history. Like, what do you think of Alan receiving MAID? Well, we would have said, well, if you send him home, he'll change his mind over time. This is not the first time he's gone through this kind of thought pattern. So, but you got to give him the opportunity to change his mind. It takes him a while. He's not somebody with the mental capabilities of rationalized thinking on a timely basis, right?
There's also the question of being institutionalized and feeling like you are stuck in the place you're in, which is often the testimony of people who go into hospital for a long time, is that they get stuck in a kind of loop and they can't think of a way out. And we all know when you feel really unwell and you go to hospital, often you feel more unwell before you get better because the environment is not particularly healing, you might say. And so there's a question there about whether he would have been better off, for example, being brought home to you and your wife or to his other brother.
Yes. In 2008, he was 51 years old. And that's when I found out he wasn't taking his medication anymore, and my father had passed away. Well, this is quite important. In 2008, my mom called me and said, Alan didn't show up for dinner last night. So I said, okay, I'll go check on him. So I went and we were still living in that area at that time, by the way. So I went over to see him, and his door was locked, and so wasn't opening it. So I called the locksmith. Locksmith came and opened up the door, and we went in there, and he was laying in his bed. And he says, I knew eventually somebody would come to see me. So anyways, took him to the hospital, got his, a little bit better on track, and they released him in our care. So I brought him home to live with us for a few months, and he did really well, really well. So it's just those kind of patterns that he would go through in and out.
And did they give him an opportunity to change his mind in those final hours and minutes and even seconds? Was there a ripcord he could pull to say, actually, no, I don't want to do this?
I would say there's supposed to be. There's 3 shots that the nurse gave him on his final moments. The first one, she released, and he's supposed to be able to communicate back if he wanted to change his mind. And he couldn't even talk at that time. So by the time they gave him the second shot, he was gone.
How long do they give between these shots? Do they wait or?
Not very long at all. I was going to say seconds, less than a minute.
So I've heard stories of people jumping from the Golden Gate Bridge and realizing 20 seconds after that they wish they hadn't jumped, and that comes to mind.
I believe that. It's like I said earlier with the suicide attempts. When they fail, they regret it. Fortunately, my brother now, we can't ask him that. Do you regret what you did? Yeah, he doesn't get that opportunity. The hospital took that away from him. Even just by sending him home to change his mind, they took away that opportunity.
Do you think he would have had a fulfilling life beyond this moment? Do you think that he could have done more and enjoyed himself again? He wasn't a lost cause in the sense that he wasn't kind of on a downhill spiral that he couldn't come back from?
You always have that hope, right? Even since 2008, when I think that was definitely had a slide there, and that's about 4 years, well, less than 4 years after my father passed away. And my father was a big part of his life. He was, of course, retired at that time, and he checked on Ellen every day. He'd bring stuff over for him, take him for rides, take him out to the Fraser River and things like that. So that was a big loss for Alan. And I don't know if he got, the best he probably did after that was when he was living with us for that time being. He did do really, really good again from 2017 to this, leading up to the point where he went to the hospital in 2019. Yeah, I mean, he had the money in the bank. He had enough support. Like, he could have made his life whatever he wanted to.
Are you a religious person, a spiritual person? Do you believe that he's somewhere else now and with your father, or is that not something that crosses your mind?
Well, if he was with my father, I think my father would be giving him a little bit of a tune-up, because I mean, you got to think of, and this is what is appalling to me. And if I was ever successful, I would make sure that this team had apologized to my mom and dad and the rest of the family, just because of the efforts and the support that they'd given Helen and we'd given Ellen. That for this medical team just to totally ignore that and not consult with us when we were there his whole life up to this last month, that you're going to ignore our support.
All your love and your work was undone by this, in a way.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's really rude, and just it's appalling. It's appalling that they can abuse patient confidentially that bad, and request his request for MAID at that level, and not even a psychologist calls. So, Alan, he's not thinking straight. You got to remember, we weren't even aware of that he had applied for MAID and been approved. They could have called us and just discussed his health, and we would have figured the same. Like, they're just trying to get on top of it. Yeah, they didn't even do that.
Has your trust in the medical institution changed since this whole experience? Do you have doubts about the way the medical establishment in Canada is working?
100%. So, I mean, I still have a lot of faith in a lot of the doctors out there, and I know the nurses have been working hard. I mean, you've seen it through the pandemic. But yes, for to leave a family member in the hospital right now, yeah.
It's what happened to a lot of people during the pandemic, was they were told not to see their family members in closed wards, and I know people personally who said goodbye to family members over Zoom or FaceTime or through a window. These are very strange times and depersonalized times, I think, between the family unit and the medical institutions that we kind of trust our family with.
Mm-hmm. My Trish, for instance, her sister just went through a major surgery, and when she was taking her to the hospital and things like that, her sister would say, "Oh, Trish, you can go home now." Trish wouldn't leave for this very same reason. She's lost all her faith in the hospitalisation and things like this, and it's really tough because we just seen this result there. I think was it in California where they said to that it's unconstitutional for the physicians to be forced to provide this kind of service. And I don't know why that hasn't happened here in Canada. You go through all your medical training there to save people, and now you're going to have a small body of people saying you got to offer MAID. I would say if I was a doctor, I would say no, I don't want to offer MAID, and this institution's not going to offer MAID. If the patient wants MAID, we'll have them transfer it to a facility that offers MAID. But no, you got to stand up.
Gary, thank you so much for telling us Alan's story.
Thank you, Flo.
That was Gary Nichols, brother of Alan Nichols, who died by euthanasia in Canada in 2019. His story is really compelling, quite frightening, and certainly brings into sharp relief the ethical problems of assisted dying. Let us know what you think in the comments. We always want to hear from you. Thanks for watching. This was UnHerd.